Okay, so today we've got with us Steve Lowndes and Bryn Thompson. Bryn has the unenviable kind of accolade of being the first person that's come on twice. Can't get rid of him. Steve and Bryn, if you don't know, run a business called New World Selling, and they've written a book called Transformational Selling, which has been going off really well recently. Lots of good feedback. We had lots of good feedback from Bryn's first podcast. People wanted to know in a bit more detail, so we brought Steve in, put the big shots back to come and I think that there's real valuable insights for business owners about selling and how to communicate in a way that promotes your business. So no pressure. So welcome.
Thanks. Thank you.
So we know a bit about Bryn. Steve, tell us about yourself. How did you get to doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, great question. So what is it? Next month, 30 years in sales, my 30-year anniversary. So that'll be something to celebrate, actually. And I was never supposed to go into sales at all. That was never. I left uni with a degree in chemistry.
Okay.
And decided that I never wanted to see the inside of a lab ever again. So that was an education well spent. But that's the one thing I learned in 3 years was, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Ended up in a sales job as a financial advisor. I think really it's just insurance salesman. I was out there selling insurance.
Okay.
And kind of that sort of springboarded my sales career. I was involved in sales in one way or another in insurance for about 10 or so years. And then after I've been doing that for a while, a couple of sort of slight digressions into other areas as well. But about 2010, I met Bryn, or 2008 actually, I met Bryn when I first joined Pareto, and we started working together from both a sales and a sales training perspective, and since then I've spent the last 15 years, 16, 17 years actually out there working with businesses across sort of every sector, helping improve the performance of their sales team. Because it's interesting actually, we have this debate quite a lot, is sales a science or an art?
Yeah.
And actually there's science in art and there's art in science, if you like, from that particular perspective. Yeah. So there's a few bits and pieces. I suppose the one thing I always remember is about the idea of entropy and everything tends towards chaos and all those kind of ideas. And that's pretty much kind of sales really, as much as you try and control things. You can only control what you do. So I suppose there's a few sort of ideas and principles like that, but I'd be stretching it to say that as much I learned in a lab that I'm necessarily applying day in, day out.
I suppose there's a strategy and a structure with it that you might.
I think that's the difference, really. I think Steve is very much more got a structured learning and development background, so very much the kind of scientist behind it. And from the book, it was Steve really who's devised a lot of the models and the methodologies in the book, whereas I'm more the free reign artist, I guess, who learned to play in the garage rather than going, being the classically trained pianist sort of person who just learned to knock out a tune. Very much as a sales practitioner, the whole learning and development and learning how to train people. I needed to lean on people like Steve and others when I joined Pareto to know exactly what a good training session would look like. Obviously, I could draw on a lot of experience, which is another thing, putting it together in a structured training session.
So what was the how did it come about going from sales into sales training? So
so I've been sort of selling for about 2 or 3 years, and then I got the opportunity to go and work, as I switched roles to an opportunity to go and work for a different insurance company, but actually working in a division that was sort of driving sales and looking more strategically about how we can create more sales campaigns, and then just by accident, as part of that, we had to go out and deliver sort of seminars and sort of training sessions, and I started to go out and deliver some of those direct to the sales team. And people went, oh, you're actually quite good at that. You're quite good at standing up and articulating what we do. And I ended up doing so. I ended up sort of getting involved in sales training that way. And that's when I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I've got to learn a little bit about the L&D side of things. And that's where I sort of started to learn the science behind, well, how should we put a structured sales training program together from that kind of piece. So I sort of fell into it. And I did that for a while. And then kind of when I got back when I moved over to Pareto, and obviously was going out to lots of different businesses, that's where I got back into selling again, and directly selling, not indirectly, but actually going out there and then selling those training services. So I sort of went from sales to sales trainer, back to selling sales training, and that's kind of where I'm at right now, really. So so selling it, delivering it, doing it all, really.
Yeah, looking back, it was quite an interesting role because we, whilst we were fundamentally salespeople, quite often, if a client really bought into you, they would say, we'll sign the contract, but we want you to do the training. I'm sure you've had the same thing. So it was difficult because that would eat into your selling time. But on the other hand, with certain clients, they probably, you'd built the trust there, so they wanted you to do the whole thing. Now we had a good training team there and people who were perfectly capable of delivering it, but the client had sort of decided that was the reason why they wanted to do it, because they felt comfortable with you, and you do a kind of a hybrid role, I guess, really, where sometimes you're selling and sometimes you're delivering, very often for the same client.
I can relate to that at the moment. You build up a rapport relationship with a potential client, and they like you and they want you to do the work. It's tricky.
But you end up in that kind of weird sort of mirrors and mirrors thing where you're talking to a client about the techniques you're going to train the sales team on, whilst using those techniques to get over. And sometimes they're going, oh right, just like you're doing now. And you're like, and you just end up in this weird, different dimension sometimes with those conversations. So it's quite fun from that perspective, but
It can work very well when it comes to negotiation, because when a client tries to chip you on price, you can always say, well, clearly, you want me to train your team to prevent the erosion of margin and profit. Why would you want to hire somebody who's prepared to negotiate down on their fees? So kind of you can kind of use it in your favour, really, and that would cause a bit of amusement and kind of, well, fair really.
So we touched on it briefly on the podcast you were on, Bryn, but it's the change over those years. So you're obviously delivering training or creating training material over more than a decade. How has it changed much in that time?
It's really interesting. So the answer is, of course, yes and no in equal measures. What hasn't changed, and we quote this in the book actually, we talk about and I think in the book, actually, we said at the time it was the first sales book. And actually, since then, I found out there were many books written actually even before that. But if you look at Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and that's from 1930 something or other. And although if you read it now, it's people still buy it now, people still read it, they still train on it. Those techniques. So basic human nature hasn't changed over the last 100 years. We're still wired the same way we were 100 years ago. There's still a way of influencing people and bringing people over and getting rapport. That hasn't changed, and it hasn't changed for probably millennia. That's the reality of it. So that hasn't. But what has changed is maybe the role that salespeople have to play now. And I think the biggest change since when I started selling, and certainly when Bryn started selling, has been the access to information, internet. That I started selling in the early 90s. I think the internet was around, no one really knew what it was, no one was using it. Within a decade, it suddenly had taken off. But the difference there is, in the 1990s, you needed salespeople. If you wanted to buy something, but you wanted to find out more about it, you needed a salesperson to talk to you about it. You don't need that now.
No.
So the idea of a salesperson who just comes in and is able to provide information, don't need that. Therefore, the role of the salesperson, and this is where the skills had to develop, the role of the salesperson has to be around, and we talk about this, it's no longer a provider of information. You've got to be a coach to your customer. You've got to coach your customer on what they should buy, why they should buy it, and how to buy it. And that's a very different type of relationship. And it means actually sellers have to go into every sale almost with the mindset of the relationship balance has got to be different here. I've now got to be that advisor. I can't just be the person who's giving information.
Yeah, I think I would add to that as well. The one thing that's changed significantly as well over that time, which is related to the same thing, is the way how people buy. Procurement. I mean, there were no such thing as procurement departments when I started. I can go over 40 years in sales. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I remember the days, particularly when I sold to local authorities, where it would get towards the end of a financial year, say middle of March, you'd go along to a mid-ranking manager within a local authority and they'd say, I've got 25 grand in my budget that's left unspent. What can you give me? You'd write an order out there and you walk away.
Yeah.
I think that happens very, very rarely now.
Yeah.
I think generally decisions are made by committee. We call them in the book decision-making unit, although units may be a misnomer because they don't always have the same objectives. Definitely procurement will want to come in particularly larger deals and try to negotiate better rates. And very often decisions ultimately are made at board level because people scrutinise every decision perhaps a lot more carefully now.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the complexity of decision making, there's two things that people still talk about which just don't exist anymore. The first thing is they say, who's the decision maker? And as Bryn was saying, there is no decision maker. It's now who's going to be involved in making the decision, who's going to have a bigger say, who's going to influence that, who's got less. So you've now got to kind of map that out and understand how that decision is going to be made. But it's not about who anymore, it's about how and all the people that are going to be involved, etc. And I think the other part as well, and Bryn touched on it as well, this idea of, and I thought back, the idea that actually when people talk about closing a deal, and they go, the assumptive close or the whatever close, and there's a whole way to that. But that assumes that the person who's going to be making the decision is sat in front of you and is going to make the decision while you're sat there in front of them, or over a Teams call or wherever else it might be. I can think probably in the last decade, I can probably think of one or two deals where I've actually been in there where the decision has been made with me sat there and then going, right, let's do this. 99% of the time what happens is they go, I really like this, but I need to take it away to make sure that I can get it from here. I've got to put it through there. We're going to have to talk about this separately. Let's come back to you. And the decision gets made when you are not in the room. And that, I think, is a big change. I would imagine probably the early part of your career, but certainly my first few sales, it was made when they were there in the room, and you knew when you left that room whether you got the deal or not. It was often, the paperwork was signed.
Take the contract with you, and
that's it. And that just never happens these days. Or I say, once in a blue moon, you get that happening.
And that makes it really challenging, I think, for salespeople these days, because when they lose a deal, they've often lost it because they're not fully in control of it. And they're not in control because they haven't necessarily agreed a next step with the client that they can actually get involved with. And so, for example, how do we get those other people to the table? How do we maybe get in front of a board? People go, oh, that wouldn't be possible. Well, it is possible. We've sat in on board meetings and presented to boards in the past and things like that. But there's a sort of limiting belief around you've got to rely on your sponsor to sponsor you into the top table. And very often that sponsor either doesn't have the gravitas, the influence, or the know-how to know how do we get this over the line, or maybe they're not even really a sponsor. Maybe they're not really totally bought into it. So it's created a lot more complexity for sellers and a lot more difficulty, I would say, in terms of getting deals done.
I think you've got to be much more strategic. You've got to be perhaps a little bit more creative. And I think just the old adage of, go in there, people buy from people they like, so strike up a great rapport with the person who's the other side of the table, ask some good questions, pitch back what you can do, ask your closing questions, stay silent, they'll go, yeah, I'll take it, and then do the contract. That's just a myth. That's back in the 1980s, but that's not how it works anymore.
So, you segued into the book quite nicely then, and then we went into closing and control over the sale, and so there was 3 things there that I kind of thought I need to ask some questions about this. Let's go back to the book. Okay, so we heard briefly last time how it all came about. From your perspective, Steve, like how did you make the first kind of thing about, we should write a book about this, or was it Bryn, or how?
I honestly don't remember who came up with the idea, but all I remember is, whether it was Bryn said we should write a book, and I went, well, funnily enough, I was thinking that in my head, or it was the other way around. All I know is, when that conversation came up, it wasn't the first time that I'd had that thought about writing a book.
Yeah.
But it was probably the first time where I thought, actually, wouldn't it be great to collaborate with someone else and write it? So I don't remember who said it, but I remember we were having a beer with Tubbs at the time, and that's where it was born. And I think after that point, we had a couple of starts, and we fit and start, and life just got in the way. So it wasn't really until the start of 2020, and I think at that point, you'd sort of left Pareto and said, you're going to do your own thing. And I said, well, look, we've been talking about this for years, let's do it. And so we actually made a start back again. I got out the old manuscripts and the work that we'd done, and I went, it's moved on a bit since then, right? And we started to write it in 2020. Well, of course, everybody knows by March 2020, suddenly we're in lockdown. The pubs were shut, no sport, everything else. And so from that particular point, it went, well, actually, we've got a bit more free time on our hands. Let's really leverage that. And heads down, and we wrote it between sort of March, and by October, we'd got the first manuscript. So by the time everything was starting to open up again, we'd written the first draft of it, if you like.
Yeah, and whilst we're very pleased with what we ended up publishing, it's a real labour of love. If anybody's never written a book before, it's definitely the 90% perspiration, 10% inspiration. We re-edited it. We had a development editor look at it. We had somebody then proofread it for us. We had a couple of beta readers comment on it. So it's gone through a lot of iterations. We probably cut a third out of the book, simply because we were told this is sort of pretty much needs to be 300 odd. I think it's about 350 pages, and there's a lot of content in there. But we've cut a huge amount out as well. We've tried to make it sequential, so going from how a sales cycle works end to end, really starting with what we think is the most important thing, which is your attitude, your mindset, and your belief system, because we think that underpins everything in sales. You can have no end of skill, but if you don't have that bit, you can graft the skills on, but you need the attitude, mindset, belief to be successful in sales.
So you've clearly done this before, Bryn, because that's where I was going to go. So the book is written in some form of sequential order, and to keep an organisation over it. So you mentioned the attitude, behaviours. Is that where you start in training? Is that
It is actually. Even this morning, I've been training people, non-sales people, and you can see there are a lot of limiting beliefs that hold people back. Limiting beliefs that the client has more power than you do. Limiting beliefs that they won't agree to what you need them to do. these people really took over once the sale's been done, but they need certain information from the client that the client doesn't always provide for them. So all these things hamper them from getting the job done successfully.
Yeah.
So you've got to challenge their thinking on that and say, you've got to make the client realise there's a consequence to what could happen if they don't give you that information. And a huge part of the belief is gaining what we call an active commitment from a client. An active commitment is where your client actually has some skin in the game and agrees to certain actions rather than you just. So if a client ever says, send me an email, we know it's a fob off. We know that it's never going to go anywhere. How do you get over that? If you're a prospector, if you're an internal salesperson, just things like that really, and that's underpinned by how you believe in what you do and how your company can benefit an organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Bryn's touched upon it there, the couple of things that we often find and about these limiting beliefs, actually it is a little bit about that relationship piece. So, I talked about before, as a salesperson, you're not there to provide information anymore and be the help desk. You are there to guide and coach your customer. Well, you can't do that unless you enter into in the way you even enter the room, if you like, or the virtual enter the conversation. You've got to enter as an equal.
Yeah.
Right? And you're going in, and I think there's still a degree, or there's often a degree of subservience that we see from a lot of salespeople. And they say, I can't say no to somebody, and I have to do this, and I have to be polite and subservient. So wouldn't be polite, but I have to go in there and be, I have to get them to like me or want to like me, and I need them to see and all these things. Rather going in there going, okay, look, and this is the way I always position it. My accountant isn't there to try and win me over as a friend, right? Our accountant, a good guy, but he will tell us, no, don't do that. You do it this way. All right, and we respect him because he comes into that partnership and equal going, I've got some expertise here and you need to listen to it, guys, because if you don't, you'll end up in this place or that place. And that is how every salesperson now has to go in, because you're not there just to provide information. You are there to guide, coach, take your customer, get them to think about the things they haven't thought about before. You cannot do that if you're going in at that subservient level from that perspective. And if we're going in at that level, well, you might as well just let the sale happen online. You've got to be adding more to it than that. And I think that's the first thing that you've got to get people to say, I'm bringing something to this conversation that is valuable to this customer, therefore we are at that equal level.
Yeah, it's interesting if you see a lot of LinkedIn posts now where they say things like, you've really got to go the extra mile for your customer, you've got to be passionate about the customer service and everything you do. Don't think anybody disagrees with that, but the caveat is provided your customer's playing their part in the process. So what you can't be, and may have said it last time, but one of my quotes is, don't be a Labrador. Don't always fetch the slipper no matter how far the client throws it. As long as your client is playing ball too, then that's fine, and we're not against going the extra mile, but don't go the extra mile if you're not getting anything back. Resending a proposal, constantly sending quotes that go nowhere, agreeing to send something over without the client agreeing to do anything back. It's futile. So much business and time and energy is lost doing that, and that again links back to the seller's mindset of going, I'm putting my client on a pedestal. No, treat them as equals, because that's really important.
A lot of business owners I speak to have a bit of imposter syndrome when it comes to what they do, the people they talk to. Over time you kind of realise most people are winging it anyway, but would you have any advice for anyone, like you say, from a mindset and a kind of confidence perspective, to go into a meeting feeling like they're on that level with them?
It is actually, I do this exercise quite a lot up front, and we talk about it. So let's say, for example, you're a salesperson, and let's say whatever you're selling, it might be to let's say, head of HR, for example. So you might be going into an HR director or a chief people officer or somebody like that. That's who you might be selling to. And it's natural for them to go, oh, they might be at C-suite level, or they might be at this level, and I'm coming in, and they know a lot about. And I always go through and I say, okay, great. I said, how many of those are there in the organisation? How many chief people officers are there within an organisation? And I'll go, well, there's one. There's only ever one. Okay, great. I said, how many chief people officers do you speak to on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis? I speak to, as a salesperson, I speak to hundreds. Okay, how many do you think they speak to? Well, occasionally they'll probably speak to the odd person at a conference, but day in, day out, they're not speaking to. I said, so you've got access to 100, 200 other people who do their role, all the things they do, all the little bits that they do differently, all the ideas that are coming out of those conversations you're having, and you could be sharing that with that person. I said, because you speak to more people who are like them than they do, therefore actually you've probably got some great insight to give to them. So let's just use that. Working with a group of guys who were having this conversation, some SDRs at a recruitment company this morning, and I said, hiring graduates, and said that you'll speak to the sales director, and I'll go, how many graduates do you hire a year into the entry level sales roles? Maybe 4 or 5. Okay, so you hire 4 or 5 people. So as a business, we speak to thousands. We place thousands every year. So we understand these people. We know what makes them tick. We know what makes them different. You speak to 5, we speak to 5,000. We've got some great insight to give. And that's what I always get them to think about, is think, what access and what information are they able to carry, either themselves or as an organisation, that person they're speaking to doesn't have access to, because it's hard, and go, that's your piece. You don't have to know as much as them about their world, but you do know a lot more than you think you do. That's where you add value to the conversation.
Which is why they're talking to you in the first place.
Yeah, when it comes to business owners, especially small businesses, usually, and you're a classic example, you are a CEO expert. So, for example, if we were looking at CEO actively, we need an expert in the room who knows a lot more about that than we do. And I think the first thing the business owner should do is, why did I set up this business? I set up this business because I have this expertise, this knowledge around a particular area, and whilst you don't want to just impart that knowledge without understanding client needs and requirements, you've got a lot of IP up here that you can assist people with. It's just how you use that in a meeting. And the most important thing I would say to anybody, whether you're a business owner, you are in your first job in sales or whatever, beyond that attitude and belief, is the ability to ask questions. If you become good at questioning, you can start, not only can you start to gain information, you can start to influence and persuade this way, you can start to really understand what client outcomes are required. It's a huge skill, and it's actually one of the weakest areas we find when we're training people. That even people who earn huge sums of money, I mean, we have clients who, some of the people earn $1 million plus a year, but can't ask really good questions for reasons that we've never quite been able to figure.
It's interesting, if you're right, and that's still been, that's been our bread and butter for probably 15, 20 years. You go in and you go, it's usually about asking better questions earlier on. I think it is about that mindset of, and it's not just about asking better, but it's having that curiosity to want to get that little bit deeper. And I always go, that's the one thing that, back to the mindset piece, if you're speaking to X number of certain personas every week, month, year as a salesperson, and you're genuinely curious about what they do and how they do it, and you ask good questions to get them to elaborate more on what they do and how they do it, every time you do that, you are building up your bank of expertise to help those other personas. So it becomes a almost like that compound effect. That ask good questions, you get good answers, you get better understanding, which enables you on the next call to ask even better questions because you've understood more about that persona, and that's where you really start to add value very quickly.
Reminds me of, I was watching a TV program and there was a couple going through couples therapy, and the question to it was a male and female. Question to the male was, "What do you like about your wife?" And so he was reading out things that he liked, and she was really surprised about that. And I was thinking about how many of us do that to ourselves. What am I good at? In the business world, what are my strengths as a salesman, as a business owner, and how do I use them? Can I use them better? And it probably goes down to that. What you're talking about in terms of mindset. We're always very critical, aren't we, of ourselves, more than probably positive. Some people are the other way, obviously.
I'm sure I relate to that, Steve.
I have no idea who's talking about that, but it's back to your imposter syndrome piece, isn't it?
Yeah,
actually, probably, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a really good exercise. And it probably relates back to the point I was making. Actually, I'm going to steal that, okay, actually. An exercise is, actually, what do you know? What do you know? What that would be really valuable to other clients? What information, what access to information, what ideas have you got that could be really valuable? And I think that would be a spin-off of that sort of question that I ask people. Yeah, so what do you bring to the party? Because every time you sit down with a client and have a conversation, there's generally stuff you can add that can really help them.
Yeah, and I think if you are relatively inexperienced, let's say you're just starting out in your sales career, because we've talked about this previously, and we've trained a lot of what we'd call SDRs, people who go into those first line jobs where they're having to pound the phones and prospect every day, probably the hardest job in sales really, because it can be quite soul destroying. That even though they don't have a lot of knowledge at that stage, and therefore they might see the client relationship very much more kind of hierarchic, but the company they're working for has huge amounts of intellectual property, has huge amounts of knowledge and expertise in it, so you've got to leverage that. And obviously in time learn it. I'm always shocked very often when companies don't know some of the really good proofs and case studies they've got in the business. They go, oh yeah, they're on our website. Yeah, but you need to be able to articulate ones that are relevant to a client, a particular challenge that a client's facing. So first thing is learn what's going on, particularly if it's in another part of the business. You can actually then relate that at the right time, and that also gives you confidence, because you go, yeah, we know about the sort of circumstance you're in because we've faced these situations many times, and this is how we've helped a company to solve that issue, and this is the outcome we've delivered or they've achieved as a result of what we've done. I
remember to that point, I remember having a meeting with a business, actually not far from here, I think they were based over at Albury Park, and they were saying as part of their induction when they bring new SDRs in, and most organisations will go, oh, we'll stick them on 2 weeks worth of product training. So they can understand our product. And they went, we've just got a better approach than that, because they don't need to know the product as in how it works. What they need to know is what does it do for our customers. So they say, our best customer we have a great relationship with. So when a new SDR starts, they go and work in their offices for 2 days and watch people use our software.
Great idea.
Talk to people about why they use the software and what it does and how it makes their life easy. And having spent 2 days doing that, so they could just pick up the phone and go, are you doing it this way? No. Maybe, and it what a brilliant induction. It's not about the mechanics of how it works, it just goes, what difference does it make? And I just go, how much better would any sales induction be if it started with, well, even if you can't get to it, but let's spend 2 days learning what it's like to be one of our customers who does or doesn't have the product. And then once you've got that, now you can go and have conversations with people.
So, attitude, very big part of sales, probably encompasses everything, doesn't it? If you were to split a salesman into some key skill sets, what would you consider those to be?
I think it's $1 million question, that, really, because there are so many. But I
at a high level.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you've got to think about in sales is most times when you're in a sales situation, you are there to change somebody's mind. And it's not easy to change somebody's mind because people have quite fixed positions. You try and change somebody's mind on religion or politics and you're probably never going to get there. But you going into a room and getting them to change their thinking is a real skill. So the first of all is you've got to, Steve says, you've got to coach them, and coaching is very much about asking them how they're going about a certain thing, but sometimes then being able to give them evidence as to what might work better, what doesn't work so well. I had a client the other day who said, "Oh, Bryn, we went into a meeting and we've never asked this question before, but we said, without rubbishing the competition, how would you rate your current supplier?" And the answer was 2 out of 10. So all of a sudden, a simple question like that clearly opened up lots of different needs. What do you do about such and such? So I think being really curious to know what's happening in the business, understanding what a client's looking to achieve in terms of success criteria, what outcomes they're looking to achieve, how they're tracking against those, and then the influencing bit is getting them to change their thinking, very often through creating some kind of insight, a light bulb moment, I guess is what we would call it.
That's it. I prefer the terminology used there, change their thinking rather than change their mind.
Yeah.
Because I it's just that little bit of helping someone see maybe something from a slightly different angle, from a different perspective, makes them go, "Oh yeah, I hadn't looked at it that way before." And I think that's the real core skill that I think great salespeople have. And it's because they ask good questions and they're able to reframe customer thinking by saying, "Well, why don't we have a look at this slightly different angle here and do that?" So the skill to be able to do that, in answer to your question, basically, yes, attitude number one, you've got to be able to do that. After that, it's the ability to ask good questions. And it's about thinking about, how do I get someone to see something differently? So I've got to listen to the answers, I've got to be curious. Funnily enough, yeah, that's probably it. It's the questioning, it's the listening, it's the mindset. Notice, actually, I think a skill that is much overrated is the ability to articulate really well and explain things really. I think that's good, but I think if you haven't asked the right questions and if you haven't got someone to see the problem from a different angle, sometimes it doesn't matter how slick your sales pitch is, it's still not going to land as well as somebody who goes, "Actually, my sales pitch isn't really particularly polished, but I ask great questions and now you're willing to receive what I've got to say back because you're now thinking differently about the problem."
Yeah, we talk about widening the gap and widening the gap between the success criteria, the outcomes the client's looking to achieve, and the challenges they're currently facing. And very often the client sees the gap like that, which is why they don't act. They go, "Okay, yeah, we're not quite where we need to be." But as we start to question, as we start to get them to think, what we're really doing is we're widening the gap, the perception of the gap, so that the client goes, "Okay, now I can see why we might want to act and act with some urgency." And that's how you build a business case. But what a lot of salespeople do is they see a gap like that and the client goes, "Yeah, we've got a challenge here," and they start pitching the solution. Or they say, "Let's do a demonstration of the product," and that's something that drives us a little bit mad. "Okay, let's go and sit on a platform and dem this for an hour and bore you rigid," rather than, "Hang on, let's really understand this, and then maybe let's tailor that demonstration or that presentation to the 3 things that will make the difference here, the 3 critical issues and how we would solve them." That's a real business case. And I would say most salespeople aren't as adept as they should be at managing that.
I wonder actually, most salespeople aren't necessarily or stop short of actually helping their customer to create that business case. And I think that's what you're trying to do, is you can't create the business case for them, but you work with your customer by asking the right questions to help them create the business case, which A, convinces them that they need to act, but secondly allows them to go and sell that internally back to the network and the complexity around decision making in organisations right now. So your key as almost a salesperson, your job is to go in there and say, for this particular customer I've got right now, or the contact that's sitting in front of me, the stakeholder that I'm dealing with, I've got to help them create the business case for why they should carry on moving forward. And I think if people went in with that mindset and that framework around that, they'd be much more successful.
Yeah. I remember being, so in a previous role, I was in Morocco talking to Aqua, which is a big oil company. I think that they were the nationalised oil and gas company in Morocco, and they wanted to change the way that they priced the fuel, and based on how far they were from the depot or what days they wanted to do deliveries, and it was really a consultation. What's your plan? How would you like to be able to do this, and what's the point of that? And then going back, using that and saying, okay, well, the software is geared towards this, and you can achieve this by doing this, and this, and the cost. Like you say, it's really more about a consultation than a.
Yeah, you're probably much more of a business consultant now. I think one of the reasons why sales has always had this negative connotation is it's seen as somebody's just trying to sell me something, but is that really going to be valuable to us? Is that going to improve our situation as a business? Which is why we talk about focusing on outcomes, that ultimately just because the contract's signed doesn't mean you're delivering the outcome the client wants. And I think what you're going to see in the future is much more, what you need to see is much more kind of cohesion between new business teams and client success teams, customer services teams, because it's all about, if you can genuinely improve a client's situation or business outcomes, they're going to come back to you, they're going to spend more money. If you're not, it's going to be a one-hit wonder. And that, I think, has in the past created quite a negative image of sales.
I think most of the point, I think the way in which businesses are now procuring services and products on a subscription basis as opposed to a one-off means that actually it's become even more important now, because maybe back in the day you could afford to sell something as a salesperson, customer bought it, whether it delivered the outcomes they needed, whether they used it, whether it turned out to be as good as you promised, there was a little bit of, well, I've got my money, I've got my commission, and the only issue for the seller was, well, I might have to go back in 5 years and sell an upgrade to this, so I probably need to make sure that
touch points.
But apart from that, it's kind of, but the short-termism was get the contract in and signed and the money, and it's up to them to make the best of it. The trouble is, if now you're selling on a subscription basis and you're only making a profit on this when they've renewed it or renewed the second year, you can't just sell something and then hope it starts making a difference in their business. So if you sell it and it doesn't start making a difference in their business, they'll cancel it after a year. They'll cancel it after a year, and actually your business won't have made a profit. You won't have actually delivered it. You may not have actually got paid. So you've got to sell with that long-term view in mind, that this has got to deliver an outcome for my customer, because I can't just go, well, let's hope it does, I'll take the money and I'll walk away and good luck with that. You've got to be with the customer all the way through, and businesses have got to think about actually how their customer success teams are as an important part of the sales process as the initial sellers who bring the contract to the table.
So we obviously talk a lot about asking good questions all the time. How would you go about improving the way people ask questions and what they're asking, how they say it?
Well, at a basic level, it's getting people to ask open questions, but also looking at what are the key challenges, delving deeper, not just finding an issue and trying to solve it straight away, looking at the impact of that on the business, the potential implications of not addressing it or not addressing it in the right way. I think that's partly critical. One thing I also find that's lacking, particularly when people are doing, say, a presentation or a demonstration, is they don't ask what I call feedback questions. So going along the way, you know, let's say you've shown a particular feature of a product or on a demo or whatever. So, you know, how beneficial would you see this? How could you see this working within your business? How important would it be for you to have this? Trying to gauge the client's level of response to that has a key indication of where you need to focus your attention, focus your pitch.
Right.
And it's done very, very rarely for again, reasons I don't fully understand, other than maybe a lack of training, is constantly getting feedback. If you're doing a presentation, nobody wants to see 50 PowerPoint slides. Maybe do 5 slides, but at each slide, okay, let's have a conversation around it. Don't say at the end of the presentation, has anyone got any questions? Because if it's gone on for an hour, believe me, they'll want to be getting out of that room.
Absolutely. You talk about that feedback piece, and it's that engagement bit throughout the sales process, and it's asking those questions, as Bryn said, partly because then you know where to target and which areas have struck a chord. But even just at a more fundamental level, it's understanding that when you ask a question and get your customer to project to the future, so you go, okay, so tell me, what particular problems would that solve? Which of your customers would like that the best? Which particular accounts do you think that's going to make the biggest difference to? When you ask those sorts of questions, what your customer has to do, and we call it sort of future-based, they have to project into the future and think about how that works. And already, you've got them imagining what the world looks like with this and that and the other. You're already creating the bit that actually we've already made the sale and we've put it beyond. And it's just things like that where you're just utilising little things like that as part of your piece that A, makes it more engaging, it secondly makes it more interesting, but thirdly, it actually is a really powerful tool getting people to think beyond having made the decision and what it looks like once they've got that up and running. Incredibly powerful. Don't see it very often, or not as often as we should.
And if you're trying to get a deal over the line, I think questions like, if in 2 to 3 months' time we weren't working together, what could possibly be the reason for that? Those questions become quite powerful, because any objections that are still lurking under the table have to surface at that point. Well, we need to convince so and so, and then you can create a next step. But not being frightened to get all those reservations out there. We talk about getting the fish on the table, you know, because I say if you leave the fish under the table, they start to stink. So get the fish on the table, get everything out there, so there's no stone left unturned, and we've got every possible reservation they could have, every reason why this deal might not go ahead. If I'm doing pipeline reviews with sellers, which I do fairly regularly, I start with the principle, tell me why this isn't going to close. Whereas most salespeople have those what we call happy ears. Oh yeah, this is coming in. And if you ask most CROs or sales directors, what's pipeline management and forecasting like in your business? You know, you'll get a 4-letter word, probably beginning with S and ending in T, because it's not usually very good for those reasons. Try to be a bit more paranoid, if you like, about why a deal might not close. And that, for me, is a great starting point.
We call that healthy skepticism. And it's that idea of, you know, it's interesting. So, on the one hand, we talk about positive mental attitude in sales, and you've got to be super positive and everything else. But one of the problems, and the Achilles heel with people who are over positive, is everything, that deal will go through, that will close, I've got great belief in it. And actually what you need to be is, on the one hand, have that positive attitude, and what we mean by that is that mental attitude says, I can ask these questions, I can go in as an equal, I have value to offer. It's belief rather than that. But what you also have to have is that edge of cynicism that go, yeah, there's plenty of things that can go wrong here. There's plenty of problems that can occur between here and here. And actually, it's my job as a salesperson to try and find out and anticipate which of these are most likely, why might that be, and just put a healthy degree, because exactly as Bryn was saying, I can't deal with an issue if I don't know it's going to be an issue. If I'm aware that something might be an issue, if I'm aware that there's going to be budgetary issues, if I'm aware that if I'm aware that actually the competition are doing this, I can at least deal with it. If I'm blind to it, I can't see anything. And I remember, and it was many years ago, 15 or so years ago, I first heard that question being asked in a sales interview, and someone said, look, if we're not working together in the next couple of months, why would that be? And the first time I heard that question, I was like, well, you're asking for an objection? I thought we were trying to avoid objections. And then suddenly dawned on me and went, no, it's a brilliant question.
Yeah.
Because at some point, you're going to get the answer, and then you can deal with it. But just because you don't know about an objection doesn't mean it isn't there. Just because you don't know the customer's got doubts doesn't mean they haven't got doubts. So let's get it out on the table. We can have an honest, frank conversation. And at least the best thing in the world you're going to have is when you walk away from that is go, at least I'm not going to have an overinflated idea or an overinflated pipeline of things I think are going to convert, because I didn't ask those sorts of questions. So it's almost ask for the objection rather than try and hide away from it.
When I was in my recruitment days, you would tell the candidate to ask if they had any reservations about them at the end of the interview, and
exactly, yeah.
And so that, because we all know that you can have an interview and you think, oh, I've got this job, this is great, and then you don't, and then you get one that's you think it's awful, and you get an offer for the job. You can never really tell what people are thinking about you or what the reservations are, which could be bizarre, just from something you've said or that's something that's on your CV, and you're like, oh, well, my mum did it, I don't know what was on there or something like that. She thought my Duke of Edinburgh award was useful for this software programming job, but which is a real story that happened. But it makes sense, doesn't it, to go, if you've got any reservations, what would stop it, and then you can stop wasting people's time like chasing and
I think the reason why generally, and why the conventional wisdom always was you don't ask those sort of questions, is like, well, you're putting ideas into their head. And it's like, no, I don't think you are. I think if they've got reservations, it's not because you've asked them if they've got reservations and they've suddenly gone, oh, well, I didn't have any before, but suddenly 3 have come to mind now you've asked me that question. Actually, if they've got reservations, they're probably sitting there, and I think you're better off unearthing them. You're very unlikely to create reservations because you've asked that question, but you are much more likely to unearth them if they're there, and then you can deal with it. And when somebody says, well, I'm just a bit worried because you've got experience around here and that's maybe not what we're looking for, you're in a great place to go, okay, totally get that, let me explain why I don't think that's a problem. But if you never get the chance to have that, that's probably the reason why you don't get the offer, and then you go, well, I could have dealt with that.
And then if they're having to justify employing someone to their manager, and he goes, okay, so that I actually, looking at this, I think this one would be better, and it's, well, actually, I thought that too, until you raise my theories, and then they become the salesman for you.
Well, you've always, because actually by having that conversation, you've coached them how to have that conversation. It's a great point, because there's a secondary question to that, and again it goes back to our complex decision making. So you might be sat with your stakeholder, the one you're dealing with, and you can ask that question and go, right, what reservations, or any reservations, anything particularly concerns you about this that would stop you moving forward? However you want to position that question, you might get something, you might go, no, I really like it. But then you just flip the question and go, okay, I know you've got to take this to your finance director. What, if anything, is going to be their reservations? What when they see that, and you always know, well, they're going to balk at the price straight away, and go, okay, how are we going to handle that conversation? And then suddenly, again, so there's almost that secondary question that goes, what are your reservations? Right, let's get those on the table so we deal with it. Now talk about other people in the business. What are they going to object to? And now again, you're just on the front foot. It's
funny you say that. I have a client where we're having a discussion about, do you have any more budget for these reasons? And the client's come back saying, well, the CEO's a figures man and wants this and this, and I haven't really explored it as much as I should, but there's more revenue there which I haven't gone after, and which I will do this afternoon once we finish this conversation.
Excellent.
But yeah, it's important, isn't it, to understand where people are and what's going on.
But it's a hard question to ask, because we're programmed not to want the objections, and a bit like the classic ostrich with your head in the sand. If I don't know that I can go back to the office and sit there and hope that the order's going to come in.
Yeah.
But I'd probably be much better off knowing if there was going to be an issue. Know now I can deal with it.
I was talking to, it's a tenuous link slightly, but bear with me a little bit. I was been talking to a well-known comedian who wants to promote their work online a bit more, and we got talking about how the process of how comedians now can, without people knowing them, have a social media presence, and they could sell out a massive 1,000-seater area, whereas someone going to the Edinburgh Fringe who's been doing it years and people know about them might struggle to fill a 20 room.
Yeah.
And one of the techniques they're using for that is crowd management. So they're clipping up segments which isn't really their stuff, but they're interacting with the crowd. They're asking those questions that are maybe getting a laugh, or they're difficult for them to ask, or is that your wife, or that kind of thing. And so perhaps those questions are actually more engaging, which gets more buy from people. Do you get where I'm going with that? Because that's what people are watching, engaging with.
You're absolutely right. We talk again back to the mindset. The best salespeople that I've ever worked with and their experience, and we're thinking about some of the guys that we've had the privilege of being sitting in front of and watching. And one of the things I've always said is they will ask hard questions, right? And I talk about this idea of working hard versus doing hard work. And some people will work hard, as in they'll do a lot of work. But the reason they've had to do a lot of work is because they wouldn't do the hard stuff that might have prevented them having to do those extra hours. Yeah. It's asking the difficult piece that, when someone says, okay, great, we'll put a proposal together. And it's like, well, before I spend 3 hours working on this proposal, what I want to know is, if I produce this proposal, but let's be absolutely honest, how likely is it that this is going to go anywhere? How, and someone even asked the question going, is this problem actually big enough for you to want to solve? Because fine, you want me to go away and put a solution together, but is this problem really big enough that you want to solve? Or could you just muddle through and carry on without it? You go, really hard question to ask at the end of what might have been a really good meeting with a client, but the answer to that question, might save you a lot of time and effort, but actually it might engage the client in a way and going, because if it's not right now and you're just going, then maybe we need to have a bit of a further conversation before we start doing hard work and putting ideas together. And it's questions like that, hard questions, really difficult questions, uncomfortable questions that you probably need to be asking more of earlier, because that will make you make better decisions about whether we just cut our losses right now, or whether if we're going to go headlong and carry on working on this, that's fine, but we've got to be aware that actually we've still got this issue to overcome, and we've got to think about how we do that.
Yeah, I think time management for salespeople, they don't always think about it. They become busy fools. I've got 5 quotations to do this week. Well, what's your conversion rate on those quotations? What's your average order value on these? I've seen people drive, 150 miles to a meeting where the profit margin probably doesn't cover the cost of the fuel. it's just things like that where people aren't always thinking, how do I prioritise my time? What do I need to be spending it on? And when if people are, I think they say people spend 7 hours a week now sending and accessing emails. That's a day of your working week. But what does a lot of that, particularly if they're emails to clients sending information, what's it really achieving? How are you tracking that as a KPI? How are you measuring the effectiveness of that? Because I would argue an awful lot of what people do isn't effective. It's I think I work a lot less hours than I ever used to, but I feel like I'm a lot more productive because I don't waste my time on things that I'm not chasing rainbows. I'm only focusing on the things that I think, here's a business opportunity, here's something I need to do as part of the next step of the process, here's what the client's agreed to do, and everything I do is governed by that now. Makes life a lot easier, but I think you can work a lot smarter that way, rather than, as Steve says, longer, really.
Yeah, people say
some people work long,
hard, but I'm working long.
Yeah.
So okay, I mean, it sounds. Anyone listening to this that's thinking that sales might be a good kind of career for them.
Yeah.
What would you give them? Any advice?
Definitely don't do it unless you're fully committed. If you a serious point, because I know we've gone through National Mental Health Week, that if you suffer from issues like that, I would say it might not be the best profession for you, because like Steve says, you've got to constantly maintain that positive attitude. You can't let things get you down. You've got to be very resilient, very tenacious. But at the same time, you've got to constantly be learning from your mistakes. You only learn when you make those mistakes, thinking, what could I do differently? And you've got to link all those kind of skills to that mindset piece we talked about to start with, to really be as good as you can possibly be. And it is, even though it's taken me 40 odd years to be able to work smart, but in the past I know I've had to work hard to get there, and you do experience a lot of failure. Now some jobs aren't like that, and you've got to decide, is that the kind of thing? The highs are great, but the lows can be pretty crushing at times.
Yeah, you're on that roller coaster, so you've got to accept that. I think the flip side to it is anybody who saying, I want to get career. I say, actually, yeah, great, do it. And there's a key part of me that now starts to look and go, because whatever it is that you're going to do, right, and if you don't go into sales and you go into something else, you'll probably end up having to sell anyway. And I give it a value. In fact, we were talking before, Bryn, just as we were coming up the stairs here, on the way in this morning, and you said about training sort of project manager. Now my wife's kind of a project program manager and stuff like that. But it's incredible when we talk about some of the skills she has to use to manage stakeholders. To go stakeholder management, you go, it's sales. But you literally take a lot of the things that she has to do, the way and all that, and you go, it's a slightly different context, but it's a lot of the same skill sets, a lot of the same approaches, a lot of the same ideas cross over to do that. You've been working with a group of sort of project managers, customer support, customer success people who are involved in that. And again, it's the same sort of skills. So I go, well, if you're going to have to learn those skills to be successful anyway, why not earn them in a trade that's going to give you all the advantages and potentially, the earnings potential and the lifestyle and the other things that you might want go into sales. So absolutely, they're great skills to have, and you can just apply them. And if you apply those really good consultative skills, the skills that will help you in so many professions, to sales, you can make a really good career. The one thing that you just got to remember with sales, and that's the bit where you get the roller coaster, is it's one of the few professions where you can be measured very quickly on how well you're doing. A lot of others, it's very subjective. Sales, there will be a number attached to your name, so that's the only bit that you've got to live with. Is it's a very results based.
Yeah, there's no hiding place.
No.
And if you're okay with that and happy to be measured by your performance, then do it. If you're not, there's probably a load of other professions out there that you might be better suited to. But don't ever think sales isn't a profession, because to do it well, and everybody we know who does it well sees it as a profession and dedicates themselves to it. And it's the same whether you're a lawyer, an accountant, or a doctor. You've got to view it like that you've got to become really passionate about it and learn your craft. You're not going to learn it overnight.
Yeah, 100%.
I have a friend who runs a business, and he says everything's sales, and he deals with like soil assessments for big buildings and stuff like that. And he just said, well, it's everything's sales. And I think at the time when I first heard that, I was trying to get out of a sales role, and he just said everything's sales, and I was like, God, if everything's sales, I'm not. But like you say, I know a lot of lawyers, and the lawyers that are in the biggest positions and paid the most, the ones that can sell, can manage clients, can bring on new clients, because they become really valuable.
Yeah,
correct.
The question we always ask is, for everyone, and to finish with this is usually really good, is like how do you measure success? How do you guys measure you could say with sales that measuring success is really obvious based on your hitting targets and all that kind of stuff, but success is different to different people. How do you measure success, Steve?
Well, yeah, in the years that I've been in sales, I've always measured it as in hitting and smashing targets. But actually, I've kind of broadened my scope a little bit more, so I'm going to go a little bit more sort of hippie-esque on this. And this is probably because age is starting to catch up with me, and I'm starting to now realise that actually that's great and up to a point. But for me, I think, how do I measure success? It's about setting yourself goals and having an idea of kind of the life that you want to lead. And every time that I'm doing something that is aligned to the life that I want to lead, I go, actually, yeah, that's success. And I think that's probably because that's where I am in my life now, where it's not just about smashing numbers, it's not about what you earn or anything else for me. It probably was a while back, but now it's much more, actually, that's the kind of life I want to lead. And every day that I'm able to do something as part of that, I tick a box and go, yeah, that's good, I'm on the way.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably quite similar now, actually. I mean, you know me a long time, and you know I'm very competitive, and that's what's always driven me in sales, is wanting to be the best I could be, and targets and numbers and all those things I was kind of obsessed about. We used to have something at Pareto called the Show Me, which was all the numbers, and I'd probably be on it 10 times a day, just checking how we were tracking against day, month, week, month, year. But I think now I've sort of mellowed a bit, because working for yourself, for me, success is about how can you still enjoy what you're doing, deliver good work that really benefits businesses, whilst at the same time achieving a decent work-life balance. So Tuesdays, as you probably know, I play cricket for Cheshire Seniors now, and if I can get a game, 9 holes of golf in during the week, and still have a productive week work-wise, that to me is kind of where I want to go from now on. Occasionally I think, do we kind of, bring a few more people in and grow it, and then go, oh, whoa, you've been there, done that, don't do it again. That's the competitive bit kicking in again. But for me, it's about just creating that really good balance, whilst also going back to the work, delivering real outcomes for businesses. You can go and people can go, your training was really good, or you've done a good job for us. And sometimes I go, yeah, but how much of a difference has it made? when I see it translating into business, I've got a client at the moment where cross-selling is going through the roof since we've done the training. Can't say it's all down to the training we've done, but I can say it's highly indicative that they're taking it on board, they're adopting it, the managers are coaching it in, and it's having a major impact on the performance. That, I think, is also that good feeling you get.
I'd echo that. I think sometimes it's that little thing when you get an email from someone that goes, "Oh, I tried that thing that you suggested and it worked and I got the meeting," or "I tried that thing and actually I got the deal." And it won't just be down to that, but you kind of go, if actually you've applied what we've done and actually it's worked for you and it's helped deliver success there, then I think that's a really good, that for me, you're absolutely right, Bryn, that's the bit that actually gives you that big buzz and you go, I've made a difference. I think that's important too, because I think, as you get older as well, there is that just piece of kind of going, I don't want to waste what precious time I've got left just working for money. I'd like to feel like I'm doing something that's actually worthwhile and making a difference. So there's that.
Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on. It's been a fascinating discussion. It's highlighted some areas I've let slip recently as well, which is always good. I'm sure people listening will have a similar thing experience. Your book is called Transformational Selling. I recommend it, and you can find that on Amazon. Anywhere else? Kindle?
There's a Kindle version.
It's available on. There's an audio book.
There's an audio book.
You get all the places that you get it from. So not just Amazon, but through Apple. All the places where you get an audio book or a Kindle or an ebook. It's available there.
There was even a copy in Waterstones in Wilmslow, and contrary to what some people think, I did not plan it. They actually did buy. They did buy a few copies, which was good.
I was in there last week actually, and there is one copy still in there.
The other one must have gone.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. And we're all on number 3.
Okay, thanks, James.
Cheers, James.
Yeah.